Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our panel on the role of policy development and advocacy in building better BRM programs. My name is Cheryl Mayer. I am Director of Policy Development with the Canadian Canola Growers Association. CCGA is the national voice for Canada's 43,000 canola farmers, as well as an administrator of the federal government's advance payment program. As canola farmers' national voice, CCGA has been working to secure improvements to the suite of BRM management programs through both research to generate new ideas and data to bring to the table, as well as through direct advocacy alongside several other national farm groups. CCGA views effective and responsive BRM programs as critical for our industry to reach both its economic and sustainability goals. So today we have pulled together a group of individuals with significant experience and expertise in BRM research and advocacy to share their perspectives on how we will build better BRM programs. Rob Gamble is former chief economist with the Grain Farmers of Ontario and now principal at Agrimetrics Consulting. Brady Stadnicki is manager of policy and programs with the Canadian Cattlemen Association. And Bernie McClean is a farmer from Saskatchewan and current chair of SaskCanola. So to start us off on our discussion, each of our panelists is going to give a 10-minute presentation, and following those three presentations, we will discuss with the panel a series of questions. Up first, we'll have Rob. Rob is going to focus his presentation on the value and importance of policy development and analytical research in building better BRM programs, and why data matters when talking to government. Rob is the former chief economist with Grain Farmers of Ontario, where he focused on current business risk management programs, policy and data analysis, and research into new business risk management programs. Prior to joining the GFO, he spent most of his career with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs in a wide variety of roles, including policy and program development, farm business management, farm taxation and succession, and as an analyst with the Farm Products Marketing Commission. Rob grew up on a farm in the Ottawa Valley. He holds a diploma and a bachelor's degree in agriculture from the University of Guelph and a master's degree in taxation from the University of Waterloo. Rob is currently principal at Agrimetrics Consulting, focusing on agricultural policy, data, and analysis. Rob?
Well, thanks very much, Cheryl, for the introduction. So my topic is why data matters in the development of better risk management programs and the conversation with a government that you have. And I think it's a very important subject to talk about. I think sometimes the issue of data analysis tends to be maybe at the end of the discussion, when I think it should be one of the first discussions that we have when talking about BRM programming. And so I'm glad we're able to talk about it today. So a question that sometimes governments ask in response to producers' concerns about existing programs is, what type of program would be better, or what type of program do you want? And my observation has been that this is a very hard question for farmers and farm organizations to answer. And often the response is, well, we want more effective programs or we want better programs. And while that is true, it's not very specific. And I think it leaves producers and governments at times a little frustrated and wondering how to get to the next steps. And, yes, I think it is the responsibility of governments to be engaging in that discussion, perhaps more than they do. But I think that it's also very beneficial for when farmers can have a better understanding of the, at least the types of programs that they want to look at or want government to look at. So today I want to give you three reasons why data is so important to the development of BRM programs and why I think it helps in the conversations with government. So reason number one, and perhaps the most obvious, is that business risk management programs are very difficult to develop. And here's the reasons that they're difficult to develop. So all farms are not the same. And I think the adage that one size fits all no longer applies to BRM programming. You've got differences in size of operations, revenue. There's a wide range of profitability, even within even within specific sectors and even in farm sizes. So that's a major issue. There's differences between commodities. So some programs that are currently functioning in the BRM sphere work better for some commodities than others. And some commodities I call, categorize them as input intensive, something like a feedlot operation where the input of feeder cattle coming into the feedlot is very large in the scheme of the business. And then you've got capital intensive businesses, something like grain farms where you have land and machinery. Capital items are very important and very large expenditures within that operation. And some of the programs, particularly when we think of something like agri-stability, which uses those categories to as part of the way the program functions, it tends not to work for the capital intensive group. And so that's why we've seen, I think, some declining numbers in the grain and oilseed sector when it comes to the agri-stability program. All regions are not the same when it comes to business risk management. You've got different risk profiles. In some areas, you've got more perhaps multi-commodity or mixed farming in some sections of a region, and existing programs tend to be different. So what works well perhaps in Eastern Canada doesn't work so well in Western Canada, and vice versa. And then lastly, it takes a lot of data to design and test a BRM product, and government holds a lot of that data. So you have to have cooperation from government if you want to do serious work on business risk management programs. For example, the grain farmers of Ontario, in my previous role with them, we worked for about 5 years on BRM development. And as part of that process, we did actuary analysis. And in order to do the analysis, we had to have agreements with governments, particularly with the Crop Insurance Agency here in Ontario, to allow them to transfer aggregated data to the actuary firm in order for them to do their analysis. So without that, it's simply impossible to do that type of work. But I will say increasingly farm organizations hold important data as well. And especially organizations that collect checkoff fees, because that gives them real-time price and sales data. And that too is critical when it comes to looking at business risk management programs and determining what programs will work and what's a good fit. So reason number 2 is the political perspective. And I will say that elected producer groups, in the absence of good data analysis, cannot recommend new BRM products because they'd be recommending unproven and untested products. And I think that's really difficult for them. And my observation has been it's almost impossible actually for organizations to make any type of recommendation if they haven't done extensive development work. And of course, that involves data. One caveat is that even when you've done all that analysis, it might still be difficult to make the recommendation, in the absence of even a further work in the area, something perhaps like a pilot program. So simply put, if you're a political leader in a farm organization, it's difficult to recommend an approach to such a complex issue without background research and data analysis that can give you, or at least get you to the point where you can at least recommend a direction or what needs to be studied further to government. And, producer engagement and focus groups are an essential part of the process, but I think it's grossly unfair to expect producers in any sector to come up with a direction on future programming after a few days of general discussion on BRMs. There has to be a longer process of engagement with the data analysis. And that's my third and final point. And that is that you need a process to develop business risk management programs. And that process requires, again, sounding like a broken record, a significant amount of data analysis and time. And so here's what I think the ideal process would look like in the development of a new BRM product. You do have to have producer and government input throughout the process. It develops confidence in the process. It develops buy-in from government and producers, and it helps producers, particularly those who perhaps are on advisory committees involved in the process, helps them to understand the product. They're the ones that are going to have to be if it turns out to be a good product, the ones that are going to be selling it, or at least communicating it, so they need to understand it. And it also, having producer input allows for real life perspective in the development of the product, which is really, really critical. You have to develop a design concept as a starting point. And maybe this is difficult in some cases, but there are lots of programs to look at south of the border. The US has a stunningly wide range of business risk management programs, and it's a great place to start if you need ideas. Next, you need to determine your data sources, also critical. What are they? Where are they? How are you going to use them? When you look at business risk management programming now, there's a lot of talk about individual type products versus products that use indexes. So this would be, instead of using producers, let's say individual costs, if you're developing a margin product, you would use some sort of index, like a fertilizer index that would count as part of the input cost if that's what you were using. So there's that type of decision to be made. Is it a revenue? Is it a margin product? Is it a whole farm product? Those are the kind of decisions you have to make. And for each of those decisions, you have to think about where the data is coming from and can we access it? And sometimes, if you can't access that data, you have to change your design. Then you should model the product, running it through a bunch of various assumptions and scenarios to see if the product works on paper. Then you need to really, and perhaps one of the most critical things, is determine what the product would cost. And for that, you usually need an actuary study. And again, just as I mentioned earlier, you need to have government buy-in perhaps to access some of that data. And it's essential, that costing is essential for government and, acceptance and credibility. And quite frankly, it's really critical, obviously, for producer acceptance as well, because the product has to be affordable. And so that's a key piece of the analysis. And then lastly, I'd say you have to develop some type of pilot program to get it off the ground. And producers, need to see whether it works in the real world, and a pilot really helps in that. You can do some simulation work, perhaps with producers, allowing them to enter their own data into a product, maybe an online survey type thing where they can do that. But the pilot is really the last, and I think the critical step in getting business risk management program off the ground. So that's the process I see, and that's why I think data weighs heavily in that particular process. So in summary, you need data because BRM programs are difficult to design and require analysis. Farm organizations need that data to make those decisions. And then you have to develop a good process for BRM development that, again, requires lots of data. So Cheryl, those are my brief remarks. I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Next up, we have Brady Stadnicki, who is going to talk about the importance of advocacy in building better BRM programs and how we can work together across sectors in agriculture to advocate for change. Brady is the Canadian Cattlemen Association's Manager of Policy and Programs and staff CCA's Domestic Agriculture Policy and Regulations Committee, as well as the Animal Health and Care Committee, providing research, analysis, and coordination for national policy development. Brady also oversees the Canadian Cattlemen's Young Leaders program and works with the provincial cattle organizations to improve and coordinate provincial advocacy on issues with national reach. Brady remains active in the family ranch in Jenner, Alberta, and graduated from the University of Calgary with a master's degree in public policy. Brady?
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks for having me as part of the panel discussion today on business risk management. It's certainly been an active issue in Canadian agriculture policy and remains a high priority for the industry. As mentioned in my remarks, I'll touch on two main themes: solutions-based advocacy for business risk management programs, and then the value of industry collaborating on BRM lobby efforts. So just, I guess, starting out, as we all know, farmers and ranchers in Canada face many risks out of their control, whether it's political risk or market risk, disease risk, or environmental risks. And on the environmental or climate risks, we've seen some pretty severe examples of this recently, whether it's the wildfires in British Columbia, hurricanes in the Atlantic region, and of course, widespread severe drought in the prairies and parts of BC this year. So we need very solid BRM programs as a backstop for these situations that are very difficult to manage as individual operators. Another reason to advocate for effective risk management programs is to support the youth in our industry. Young producers that are just starting out are typically, more highly leveraged and don't have as much equity built up in their operations. So having reliable and equitable programs in place can be the difference for our young and future producers getting through those inevitable difficult times. So Rob touched on the research and analysis that goes into evaluating risk management programs, and just wanted to say this is so incredibly important for solutions-based advocacy. Our approach at the CCA and really with the entire agriculture lobby is that when we come to government with challenges, we also want to bring solutions to the table in order to address these challenges. And BRM programming is no different in that regard. Last spring, for example, the beef industry worked with MNP to conduct some analysis of actual cattle operations in different regions of the country and of different sizes and cost structures that would support industry recommendations on agri-stability enhancements. And I know other commodities did this analysis as well. And as an industry, we were able to present data that showed, where the problems were within the program, which types of farms were impacted, why they were impacted, and then some solutions on how to address these problems. And this went a long way in our advocacy with federal and provincial governments, and really believe it played a small but key part in advancing the recent program changes, which I'll touch on a little bit more here soon. I believe so I'll touch a little bit just on the value of collaboration in the agriculture sector when it comes to business risk management programming. And I believe, in general, over the last 5 years or so, we've seen stronger levels of cooperation between farm associations than probably ever before. While agricultural organizations have maintained their independence on, their core values and commodity-specific issues, I think organizations have worked really hard to identify policy issues of common interest and position. And as a result, there's been some great collaboration and a more united agriculture voice that resonates in Ottawa and within all the provinces and territories. And because policymakers, meet with multiple interest groups and have numerous issues hitting their desk each day, having more people or groups conveying the same message tends to be remembered and addressed with more urgency. So, one of the examples I use is at a rural caucus meeting in federally, one MP who met with grain and oilseed farmers might raise an issue that they heard in a meeting last week around risk management programming. And then another MP who met with beef or pork producers also heard the same issue with a particular program. And I think, having that same message and working together can really help drive some consensus and momentum for policymakers to, raise the issue to a high priority and push for solutions. On BRM policy, we do have a number of recent examples of agriculture working together to advocate for improvements. The first example would be the lobby efforts recently to enhance agri-stability, which has been a key priority for producers since the program was transformed under Growing Forward 2. One key program change that almost all organizations agreed upon was the removal of the reference margin limit, which caused a lot of inequitable treatment of farms under the program and added some unneeded complexity to the program. So agricultural organizations collaborated on a number of joint advocacy tactics, including federal and provincial groups working together, sharing information and analysis, and really comparing notes in that regard about whether the analysis was providing the same outcome or not. Of course, sending joint letters and holding joint meetings with the same requests to improve the program and very specific recommendations. And then, leaders of national organizations, for example, gave coordinated presentations to federal, provincial, and territorial agriculture ministers when they met, of course, of which provincial ministers heard about the same issues from their provincial organizations and stakeholders before the meeting. So overall, there was just, I think, a lot of coordination at both the national and provincial spectrums of the industry. And of course, I should mention the federal and provincial territorial piece, because it's a shared, business risk management programs are a shared jurisdiction in Canada. And as a result of this collaboration and joint advocacy tactics, we saw the reference margin limit removed under the program last spring, which was a huge accomplishment after many meetings and years of work. The federal government also proposed an increase to the compensation rate under agri-stability, which hasn't been agreed upon nationally at this time, but it has been implemented provincially and in some provinces over the past few years. And I would say getting national consensus on this continues to be a priority moving forward. Another recent example of the agriculture industry working together on business risk management would be through drought relief programming this year in Western Canada. And I would say there was significant collaboration amongst crop and cattle sectors and livestock sectors, particularly on amending crop insurance programs to help deal with the hot and dry conditions. Organizations collectively called for changes under crop insurance that would make it easier for farmers to claim insurance and then quickly convert their poor crops into salvageable livestock feed. And this joint call for action and collaboration, I believe, helped governments react more quickly to the situation and amend programs that would support both the crop and livestock sectors when dealing with very challenging conditions this summer. So as I've kind of touched on a few recent examples of success working together as an industry for BRM program improvements, now we're moving towards the next policy framework, which will replace the Canadian Agricultural Partnership in 2023. And I really believe it'll be key for industry to continue with this collaborative approach wherever possible. I know at the national level, industry associations have already met a number of times to find consensus on policy and funding requests and communicated these objectives to policymakers. A number of these priorities were also communicated in person by association leaders at the recent federal, provincial, and territorial ag ministers meeting earlier this month. So to wrap up my section, I'd close by saying that the next year will be a critical time in BRM policy development. There's many opportunities to provide input as associations or as individual producers, whether it's engaging in the consultation sessions that are open, or contacting your federal or provincial elected rep, or even your local association delegate or member. But it's up to us as industry to show up with solutions and make our priorities known. And I think, as I mentioned in some of the recent examples, collaboration will help us go farther in that regard. So thanks for the opportunity and looking forward to the discussion. Pass it back to you, Cheryl.
Great. Thank you, Brady. Okay, and finally, we're going to hear from Bernie McClean. Bernie's going to provide a farmer's perspective on the importance of responsive BRM programs to help manage the many risks that farmers face that are out of their control. Bernie operates a 2,000-acre grain farm in northwestern Saskatchewan near Glaslyn. Typical crops grown on his farm include canola, wheat, barley, oats, and peas. And recently, Bernie integrated bison into his operation in an effort to diversify his farm. Bernie completed studies in agronomy and held several positions in the farm service sector prior to transitioning to full-time farming in 2011. Thoughtfully managing land resources and employing best management practices have been keys to achieving success on his no-till farm. Bernie is currently chair of Saskanola, and prior to that, Bernie served as chair for CCGA. In these capacities, Bernie has become a leading advocate for farmers working to ensure full access to information, targeted resources, and innovative tools to successfully grow and market food. Bernie?
Thanks, Cheryl. I'm pretty excited about the conversation here already. Holy smokes, Rob and Brady have hit a lot of keynotes. Both common themes that I'm hearing already: cooperation, collaboration, data collection. I couldn't agree more, Rob. The data collection is critically important here, and having that and understanding that and being able to move forward in a proactive manner with suggestions for government. I get the frustration. It's certainly there, and I'd love to get right into the discussion here today, but I'll give a bit of background and some thought on my perspective here as well. So anyway, when I was asked to present, I was actually asked to give the farmers' perspective on the need for BRM programs that work for farmers and help to deal with the uncontrollable risks that are out there and on our farms. And to be honest, I actually struggled with that thought a little bit. And the reason why is I don't know a single farmer out there that would be comfortable accepting the fact that from time to time they need to rely on BRM programs. Again, the reality is agriculture is a huge driver of the Canadian economy. And as an example, and I'm specific to canola, I'm really involved with canola, obviously, with being here in the province of Saskatchewan and then CCJ at the national level. But canola alone contributes just about $30 billion to the Canadian economy. And again, specific to canola, it employs over 200,000 jobs. That's just one commodity out of the many that we grow, raise, or otherwise produce here in the ag sector. So again, when you think about the contribution to the economy, it's quite exciting. And then you start to think about the risks. It's already been alluded to somewhat here with both Rob and Brady, but weather, huge risk, right? Probably number one in my books. It's the one that we absolutely can't control. Geopolitical issues, trade, rail blockades. And this one's old, but it's new again in the sense that it's been brought to light with the pandemic, but supply chain issues. And this list of risks goes on. So in agriculture, as already mentioned, the number one risk is Mother Nature. She can make or break you. And many of the other risks associated to agriculture risk or BRM type risk would be the result of human or government interaction. So these risks are out of our control as a farm operator, and they have substantial impacts on the farm financial well-being. So considering these risks and what agriculture contributes to the economy, an argument can definitely be made that access to effective federal funding is needed. The key here is to avoid ad hoc payments, and a well-structured business risk management program or suite of programs will help in that respect. So Brady, I think it was you actually alluded to it at the end of Growing Forward 2. And I want to say back in 2013, there were significant changes made to AgriStability and AgriInvest. And all these changes significantly eroded the effectiveness of the two programs. For AgriStability, the trigger was lowered from 85% to 70%. And with respect to AgriInvest, the contribution was capped at 1% from the previous 3% of eligible net sales. So to tell you the truth, in 2014, I exited AgriStability as it became very apparent in our operation. Again, grain, oilseed, pulse operation at the time. Now, as Cheryl mentioned, we're diversifying and have included bison in the operation. But it became very apparent that it would be difficult to trigger on the current AgriStability program. And it was actually just going to be another cost to our operation in the sense of premiums. Rob also alluded to part of the problem there is capital intensive. When you think about the grain and oilseed sector, it's difficult to make AgriStability work. And it's one of the reasons why governments struggle to come up with effective BRM programs. So since 2014, participation is dropped, and it's currently sitting around 30%. And just as a side note, I actually got back into the program, AgriStability specifically, not necessarily because I thought it was going to be helpful with margin declines, but because it allowed me an opportunity to use real numbers in conversations with federal and provincial ministers and other members of parliament. So, and as bad as this past year was, Brady alluded to it, 2021, drought, and then actually on our farm, hail, just to put the icing on the cake, and AgriStability is not going to trigger for our operation. So to be fair, I touched on AgriInvest as well. It does actually provide a bit of value, but our ability to contribute as producers is so small that it takes years to build a fund that provides meaningful safety net for the farm, or to provide a meaningful safety net for the farm. So I'll just touch on what I've actually learned from my experiences since 2013. So number one, government needs to invest in BRM programs for the long term. They have to understand that agriculture is cyclical. There's definitely ups and downs. When the industry is doing well, that's not the time to cut programming like they did in 2013. So again, it seems like governments, they're becoming out of touch with reality at times, it feels. Anyway, personal feeling, discussions with others, there's definitely that feeling is real. Programs of today need to reflect reality. Agri-Invest contribution limits are inadequate. The current limits do not reflect the realities of modern farm operations. And actually, to make it worse, if you can actually build a fund that may help you out in a year of margin decline, it actually becomes a target of government. With agri-stability, the positive agri-stability margin, according to allowable sales and allowable expenses, does not equate to a profitable year. And what is considered for allowable sales and expenses does not reflect the reality of an operation. So again, in reality, the depth of loss is severe, and the trigger for the program being at 70% instead of 85% only exacerbates the problem. And maybe just a third point, I'll touch on agri-insurance, and I'm not going to focus on it here too much. It's not perfect. And each province, it seems has their own ups and downs, or pluses and minuses when it comes to provincial crop insurance or agri-insurance as a whole. But it is a critical program for the crop sector, and investment needs to be continued there. So I'll finish off with a final thought here. Now, we have governments that want farmers to adapt and show continual environmental improvements. So that'll take investment. Making that investment will require a level of confidence in the financial stability of my farm and farms of my neighbors. So a properly designed and well-managed business risk management program will facilitate the confidence needed for this type of investment. So with that, Cheryl, I'll turn it over to you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion here.
Perfect. Thank you, Bernie, and thank you to all of our panelists for their presentations. I think you're right, Bernie. It really set the table here for a really interesting discussion that we can have now, facilitated by several questions that I've got here. So maybe I'll call on Brady to weigh in on the first question. From your perspective, why should governments invest in BRM programming rather than other priorities that they may determine are important, and I think we would agree are also important, like trade development or innovation?
Yeah, a great question. And I suppose from the beef industry's perspective, and you agreed to it there, that we believe there's a strong role for governments to invest in market access and development and innovation and research and business risk management programs, because they're all critical for farmers and ranchers to be successful. And, in many ways, having diverse markets for our products and new technology and innovative practices from research are key to managing, a lot of risks that the industry faces. But there's always going to be, an unknown or something that's out of the control, that's unforeseen. And there's, I think that highlights the role of why solid business risk management programs and investment in those programs and improvement in them are needed for a backstop for producers in those situations. And it's, I think leading to a key advocacy piece that pretty much every ag association that I've communicated with over the past little while here is putting forward to governments is that more and more priorities are coming up under the next policy framework. There's the ones that have remained pretty constant over the years, and then new priorities. And it's, I think, going to be really important that the overall funding envelope of the policy framework is increased to make sure that the that the constant priorities aren't diminished by funding some of the new ones. I think there's a role to, as I just kind of said, there's a strong role for governments to invest in all of these areas, whether it's the market access and development initiatives, especially research and innovation, and then effective business risk management programs.
Yeah. Bernie, do you want to also comment on this in terms of why government should invest in this area?
Sure, thanks, Cheryl. And both you and Brady actually alluded to it here as well. Obviously, we need investment in all these areas. We can't forget again what agriculture and the role that it plays from coast to coast. It's a huge role in the Canadian economy. I've already kind of stated some of those facts, but $29.9 billion canola alone contributes to the Canadian economy, supports 207,000 jobs. The two examples here that are being used are great of why properly designed and functioning BRM programs are important. Trade issues are one of the biggest risk factors, definitely right up there with weather, obviously weather number one. But canola to China, barley to Saudi Arabia, durum into Italy, pulses into India, and that list goes on and on and on. And I'm sure, Brady, you can give examples from the livestock side of it as well. But without free trade and open borders, farm incomes are affected deeply. So we're an export-dependent country. Cheryl, you also touched on in this question, a little bit around innovation. And I do believe government certainly has a role in regard to innovation. Investment needs to be there. Innovation, research, obviously extremely important as well. But we as producers have a role to play as well. I'm continually asked to do more sustainably for the environment. And I'm not saying that's good, bad, or ugly. It does frustrate me to a very small degree because I'm quite proud of the effort that I've put into being sustainable with respect to the environment, and not just the environment, but the social and economic sustainability aspects. That's critically important as well. So there are many aspects to sustainability, and that, I've already referenced it here, but environmental, social, and economics, a three-legged stool. And forgetting that these legs need to grow in parallel can be detrimental to the strength of the stool. So if one leg, for example, environment, is forced to grow quickly, the stool falls over. Not a good design. If one leg is cut off, let's use economic, the stool falls over. So the point here, balanced growth is required. So there are many opportunities to better producer habits, or maybe best management practices would be a better term to use other than habits. This could include newer equipment. As examples of that, the ability to use sectional control when you're, using crop protection products, or fertility, variable rate, yield mapping, and automation are just a few examples to name. But what about fertility formulations that limit losses, seeding unproductive land to forages? Now, these are definitely all possibilities, but it comes at a cost. So ensuring that producers have risk management programs that allows them the confidence to make these investments that in theory are better for the environment, the social and the economic sustainability of farm operations. Again, that backstop, Brady referred to the term backstop a while ago, critically important. So again, properly designed or functioning business risk management programs will give producers the confidence to invest in their future and the future of many potential generations to come. So our government can invest dollars into trade efforts, and I definitely applaud this. It has to happen. It needs to continue, but ultimately, whether a border remains open or closed, again, it's out of our control. Again, the backstop, right? When a trade issue pops up, when a weather issue pops up. With respect to innovation, all producers want to do is to be better. But the ability can definitely be hampered with the risk versus reward aspect of it. And again, strong BRM programs allows the confidence to always continue to achieve better and take away the uncertainty from trade or other out of our control type risks.
Thanks, Bernie. Those are great points about investing for government and asking farmers to invest as well as we want them to do better. Let's move on to some questions about data. I'll get Rob to kick this off since you've talked quite a bit about data. And comment on what is the role of government and industry in sharing data and working together in making BRM programs successful for farmers.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. I am going to be a one-trick pony here when it comes to data, aren't I? As I said in my presentation, it's really critical that government and industry share information, because, government has and holds data that without that access to it, you simply just cannot do good development work in the BRM sphere. Like, you have to have data to determine what a program is going to cost and how it's going to work. They have all that historical data. And again, as I said, increasingly farm organizations have more and more data, I think, as well. And that's maybe one of the discussions that needs to take place too, is, are we willing to share? Are farm organizations wanting to share that? Do their producers understand, that it could be beneficial for them to be, sharing some of that data in the development of their products? So working together, doing the data analysis together gets you much further down the road with government and with industry, to the place where you can talk about specifics, about ideas, about cost, and about funding. It's just a much better place to be when you work together.
Mm-hmm. Brady, do you want to comment on this one too?
Sure. I think, I completely agree with Rob and the points he made around, sharing that information and working together is going to, get us, take us a lot farther, as it's in, the best interests of government and industry for programs to be effective and equitable. So working together there and having producer input will, in my view, and I agree with Rob, help us in that regard. And I just think, there's one point that comes to mind on sharing information that, that's maybe hasn't come up in years past as much as just, how the industry has grown and evolved with new practices and increased capital costs. The farm today is not what it looked like 2 or 3 policy frameworks ago. And the example I'm thinking of is under agri-stability and the $3 million payment cap. That's something that hasn't been increased in multiple frameworks under agri-stability, but the size of many operations certainly have increased or grown, since 2 or 3 frameworks ago. So, and the program hasn't kept up in that regard. So, just an example of sharing information and working together on something that might not have been an issue, 5 years ago, that we're seeing more producers run up against now. And, hopefully in this, development and consultation process of the next policy framework, I know, whether it's at the provincial level or certainly at the federal level, governments are doing, analysis and jurisdictional scans of programs and different options. And, really hope that can be, shared in as much detail as possible with the industry, to work together on, identifying, which trade-offs might be acceptable in terms of, new program design or which ones might be challenging in a road that we don't want to, we just can't go down. So I hope there's as much sharing of information on both sides, as Rob mentioned, as possible here in the next policy framework development.
Yeah, good point. Okay, next question. I'll get Bernie to start this one off. We know that agriculture is a very diverse sector, and Rob talked about that in his opening presentation, how all farms are different. So what is the value then of various agriculture groups working together in achieving better BRM programming for all of us? Bernie?
Thanks, Cheryl. Absolutely, I can take a shot at this, and I think it's going to be relatively easy. Brady's already alluded to it in his opening comments as well. The unified voice, absolutely. I could really stop there. Just to give a bit of background on it, I'm sure Brady will possibly as well, or maybe Rob, you've got thoughts on it. But it has been great to see so many come together with that united ask. And again, Brady really touched on all of this already, so I won't spend too much time on it. But while I chaired CCGA, we had a united front that represented many of the agriculture industries from the West Coast right to the East Coast. Rob touched on that. It's difficult to the farming practices are so unique from one side of Canada to the other. It's difficult to make a program that works effectively for all. One size doesn't fit all. But the fact that that diverse group could come together for one ask or a few asks specific was incredible to see. And, at the time, our message was very clear. The triggers needed to be reestablished to 85%. Brady referenced the removal of the reference margin limit. We were successful in that. And Cheryl, maybe just one comment to the previous question, the technical working group and sharing data and coming to the grower organizations and the working together, not just as organizations, but provincial and federal governments working closely together too, right? Like a technical working group would go so far. And I know at CCJ, we lobbied for that often. And Brady, you also referenced the contribution margins being increased back to the 80% level. Now, we haven't got consensus yet with the provinces, but all things that the industry came together as a united voice. So again, to some degree, it shows the seriousness of how poorly the BRM programs are performing right now, specifically to agri-invest and agri-stability. And crop insurance certainly has some downfalls and inadequacies, but it does currently provide some level of protection. So the fact that such a diverse group came together for a very specific ask shows the importance and the need for improvements and how that unified voice ties it all together.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bernie. Rob, I'll get you to comment on this too, just in terms of the value of collaboration, maybe in terms of sharing data. As you noted, data is your platform today. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, Cheryl, I'll just make one comment on that, and that is that I've wondered for quite a number of years now whether or not Canadian agriculture in general needs to have sort of a data center or a group of individuals, whether they're drawn from different organizations across the country, that focus a lot and specifically on data and data analysis within the context of BRM development. And so I agree with Bernie completely. Like if you can have producer groups agreeing on a single focus and moving forward with the united voice, I mean, that's obviously the way you want to go. And I think the way to do that is going to have to be, a continual process of working on improvements and product design going forward.
That's an interesting idea for sure. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about private insurance. Something that I think we've seen governments recently make some changes to the way they're handled within our suite of BRM programs in order to encourage the use of private insurance programs. So what do you see as the role for private insurance programs, and how do you see that evolving in the future? Bernie, do you want to start this one off?
Sure, I can try. I'm certainly eager to hear what Rob might have to say about this as well, but I'll take a shot at it. I definitely believe there is opportunity for private insurance. The products are out there, right? I know of a couple of companies off the top of my mind, and there may be a few more, or one, or I don't even know, but there may be others that I'm unaware of. Depending on the farm and the circumstances, I think private insurance products could definitely work. I've not used them myself. I've heard varying degrees of feedback ranging, and there is actually growers in the area here that are using some of this now. And so again, I've heard varying degrees of feedback. So it ranges from it's simply too expensive, oh no, it's actually not that bad at all. And with all insurance, you'll always get, well, I'm happy with it, the design is good, the protection was good, and then you get others that are completely unsatisfied. So I don't know what's best there. I do wonder though, after a year like this, and I mean, this is really pie in the sky at this point, but after a year like this, how will private insurance stack up? Or are they going to be able to weather the storm? And again, this is just all questions that I have in my mind. And I guess a year from now, we'll probably know. But I would have to assume that the payouts are going to be high. Reinsurance is obviously going to be expensive. And in turn, that expense has got to be passed on, right? So that potentially pushes premiums to potentially really high or even unaffordable type premiums for producers. Again, speculation on my part. I'm not suggesting that's what's going to happen, but I'm curious to see how it all unfolds here. So ultimately, yes, I believe there is a role. It's definitely an option, but each individual farm operation is going to have to determine whether that has a fit for his or her farm.
Perfect. Rob, what's your perspective on this one?
Yeah, interesting comments, Bernie. That was a good thought with respect to, when we experience a difficult year, how did the private insurance products fare up? So I do agree with Bernie. There's a space for private insurance in the BRM arena. I would say that any private insurance product is probably going to have difficulty competing head to head with government-run programs where government shares the cost of premiums with producers. I mean, it is a tough thing to compete with that. I do think, though, they have a role probably going forward in covering areas where government and at levels that government is not willing to provide coverage for. So, for example, agri-stability above 70%. I know there's some products out there right now that at least there were anyway. I think they're Western products that cover that 15% that gets agri-stability back up to 85. So you have private insurance. But even if agri-stability was at 85%, there might be a space there for them to provide coverage maybe up to 90% or something like that, where individual producers feel that they want that coverage and the price is reasonable, I guess. And that's the one caveat I would say about private insurance is that, especially in a revenue or margin type of product, it may not be available for everyone simply because the premiums, if they happen to be a producer that maybe is on the mid to lower sort of spectrum with respect to profitable margins or revenue, then the premiums that private insurance might charge there might just price them out of the market. So that'd be the one caveat for whether they'll sort of be make headway, I guess, or not. But there's definitely a place for them, and in particular, I think in providing very individualized add-on type products to existing programs might be a space that they will continue to be valuable.
Thank you. Okay, so now let's move and talk a little bit about farmers. And I think, Rob, you talked about this a little bit in your opening presentation about the importance of getting farmer feedback and including farmers in the conversation here. So Bernie, I'll start with you since you are our farmer here. How can individual farmers get their voices heard with government?
Well, obviously calling, emailing, texting, whatever it might be, right? There's, when it comes to members of parliament, even provincial MLAs, that information is out there. But I've had tons of conversations with different growers, right from the BC Peace area of, or the Peace area of BC through Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and right into Ontario. I've had great conversations. I've used those conversations and examples when talking with, MPs and our lobby efforts that we do as the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Maybe a little bit closer to home, there's probably opportunities even with local RM councils, and I know that varies from province to province, but in Saskatchewan, they're referred to as rural municipalities. Obviously, their focus there is roads, bridges, culverts, that type of stuff. It's not necessarily business risk management type programs, but if that group is hearing enough of it, it can certainly go to provincial leads like SARM here in Saskatchewan, and SARM can carry that message at a federal and provincial level as well. So I think the key here, though, is I've already alluded to it, positive conversations, well thought out, forward-thinking conversations. Pounding fists on tables or taking it to social media, whatever form that might be, that's probably not going to help the situation, and it's likely only going to create more frustration. So I guess maybe to wrap up that question or that part of it for me is, positive forward-thinking conversations, right? Let's be proactive in this space and move forward together.
Mm-hmm. That's great, thanks. Rob, what's your perspective on bringing in the farmer's voice?
Mm-hmm. Well, you'd be disappointed if I didn't say better data. So I'm going to say better data. And, I think what data does is it allows you to have conversations on their level, particularly if you have, you know, senior bureaucrats that have worked on this. You're able to engage them at their level, and you're able to get into the conversation because you have data and analysis to share. And I think if you're developing or creating, governments are interested in that. Like Bernie said, that, you know, maybe they have in their mind, you know, pounding on the desk view, and to come with ideas and information. I think governments are interested in that. And that's not to diminish the need for political advocacy and discussion. Obviously, that's critical. But I can't help but think that when farm organizations meet with senior management in government and ministers, the fact that they have data and research to discuss, I think does nothing but help the political discussions.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Brady, I'll get you to comment on this one too.
I think both Rob and Bernie made some great points I agree with. I would say two things. I just think working in tandem between grassroots individuals and producers and industry associations has and can lead to you know, some really strong outcomes for our industry. You know, one of the things from a you know, I guess seeing it from growing up in the industry, but also working on the staff side, especially while in Ottawa, is, you know, when we're meeting with minister staff or MPs or senators, and, you know, they are hearing the same message from, you know, a producer at home that was at their barbecue or at their town hall event as what they're hearing from someone in their office in West Block. I think that goes a long way in terms of you know, getting us an outcome that we want in terms of effective lobbying on BRM or any other issue. And then, you know, just as a staff as well, and to the question about individual farmers having their voices heard, you know, just showing up to you know, to the events in their local area from a political perspective, whether it is those barbecues or town halls. And, you know, from an industry association perspective, you know, there's typically the regional or county meetings, and showing up and providing your input, especially, you know, just from a staff perspective, you know, and Cheryl, I'm sure you agree, like, we're interested in trying to, you know, hear about these issues and figure out, okay, how can we, you know, think of a solution to this with these issues being brought forward. So, you know, if you, as a producer, you know, come there and make your problem heard or your position heard, you know, it's going to go, I think, a lot farther and hopefully getting addressed.
Yeah, absolutely, Brady. As staff, we always do really like to hear from individual farmers about their experiences with BRM programs, positive and negative. Yeah. Okay, the next question is for you, Rob. As you talked about in the beginning, it's a complex process in terms of building a new BRM program. So how do you test the effectiveness of potential new programming to get that practical feedback from those who the program is intended for before the program is introduced?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cheryl. It's one that it's a bit of a thorny problem, right? I mean, ideally, you know, in a perfect world, you'd introduce some type of new product when everything was going really well in the industry, because nothing's worse than trying to develop a product when things are very difficult, because oftentimes there's glitches in the product. So I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think you know, advisory groups are not just sort of window dressing when it comes to developing the program. You want to have producer groups involved along with government, so that they can tweak as they go along. So, for example, when I was with the Grain Farmers of Ontario, we worked on a product. We ended up looking at a gross margin product, but there was a lot of support for a revenue product. And the decision to go with a margin analysis in the end was driven by producers in the group. They looked at it. They were with us as we were developing it. We had lots of presentations and looked at the data and surveys from larger producer groups. We had surveyed about 940 producers in Ontario and got their opinion on products. And so you really have to have that involvement right from the get-go. It's not, like I said, it's not something that's just a side sort of thing to the development. You have to have it involved. And the pilot program probably is the best route to go when it comes to actually getting it introduced on the ground, because until you actually get it out in the field and in producers' hands, you really don't know whether it's going to work real life. You hope it will, but you might be able to do some simulations where you send the data out, send the product out, let producers fill in surveys and put their data in to see how it works. I mean, that's another way to go. But I think ultimately for both producers and probably for government as well, the pilot option, I think, is the best route to go in introducing a new product.
Okay, yeah, the pilot to get some real life experience with it. That's great. Yeah. Okay, so I think Rob, we'll get you to weigh in first on this next question too, because you really touched on it in your opening presentation about how all farms are different and how that makes this so challenging to offer programs that are effective and responsive. So is it reasonable to expect that government can provide BRM programming that offers value and flexibility to support all sectors of agriculture?
Well, I think it's reasonable, but that's not to say that it's easy. And it is difficult. I think that's why governments perhaps have moved and have been there for quite a while to the whole farm products. When it comes to business risk management, they're attractive because they ensure the individual farm operation on its historical performance, but they fall short for a number of the reasons I think I mentioned earlier, because of different commodities, different business structures, and so for the whole host of reasons, those are difficult. I think that governments are going to have to move towards more individualized products per the sector. I'll use crop insurance as an example. So for example, in Ontario here, there's a very diverse group of crops, and Agricor, the provincial agency that handles crop insurance in Ontario, they have over 100 different plans. And within those plans, each of them, you have different options and various levels of coverage. And I think that's the model that we're going to have to move toward, where business risk management products have a lot more options within them, various coverages that perhaps producers will have to buy up themselves, either through private insurance or through it. And I think it's like building an evolving set of programs that build on basic programs. And I think we see that in the US as well. They seem to be always evolving their programs and introducing new products. And I think that's the only way to get to a situation in Canada where we have BRM programming that can fit with the diverse range of commodities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Brady, what's your perspective on this one?
I think Rob hit the nail on the head with his comments there. The perfect program is definitely a moving target, and continuous improvement, something we need to keep striving for. Agree on what we're seeing, or at least what we've assessed in the United States in terms of the programming that is available to producers there, and really just how flexible it is based on what region you're living in, or what sector you're in. Having access to revenue insurance or subsidized price insurance as a cattle producer, for example, are things that we know in Canada. We do have to take trade risk into consideration for sure, but I think we're interested in having a bit more of an open discussion of how more industry specific programming can be developed and become more prominent. And probably just the last thing I would say is definitely see the balance between ensuring programs are flexible for regional or differences or production practices. But I think a primary goal for program design needs to continue to be around equity and reliability during disaster situations, because on for example, a year or the past couple of years that we've had between the pandemic and then some severe weather events, you know, those are the years where they, if you're participating for 10 or 15 years, that they really need to kick in and be there. So I think that's a primary objective for governments as well, is making sure the programs are there when they're really needed.
Mm-hmm. And Bernie?
Sure. Thanks again. Both Rob and Brady have highlighted some very key points here, but the one that, when I read this question, my mind immediately went back to collaboration. You know, cooperation, collaboration. So yes, absolutely. And it's commonly referred to as collaboration. So again, I'm being a little bit snarky there, but I've certainly noticed in the last number of years the collaboration, and Brady and Rob have both alluded to it, but the collaboration among industry associations, this is a great thing. The industry and producer associations have a common goal. That common goal ultimately is the success of the farm community. Now that community doesn't just include farmers, it's a community, right? It includes the producers, the exporters, processors, life science companies, researchers, and ultimately the end users that we all do it for. So if government could recognize the efficiency of collaboration and continue to collaborate and work with us, we can work to that common goal of a successful, thriving agricultural community. I mean, we can develop something that provides value and it would support all sectors. I agree with Rob 100%. It's achievable. It's not going to be easy. And I don't have the answer on what that might look like. Rob's got some great ideas here and great examples of maybe directions that we could go. I don't have that answer. But the key is, don't develop something and say, this is what you get. I think I've heard that commonly throughout the day or throughout the morning here as well. You need to test it. You need to put it out there. You need to use it. You need to have the flexibility to go back and adjust it and make it something that's going to work for all. So again, collaborate with us and we can get something developed that is success for all. Agriculture being number one, Canada, and the consumers here and around the world. So Cheryl, again, my answer is yes, absolutely. It's just not going to be easy.
Yeah, I think we can all agree with that. And really with that wraps up our discussion session here. So I want to thank all of the panelists for contributing to this, really what I think is an important discussion. I think it was a rich discussion on building better BRM programs. It certainly highlighted for me how complex and challenging the process is, right from how Rob highlighted, the need for research and data and pilots. And then from there, you need to, be able to continue to evolve these programs over time. It's not just, done and then we can walk away. It's an ongoing process. And then the word collaboration, I think Bernie brought it up here again at the end, and how important that is for us to collaborate with government and across our sectors to advocate for the type of programming that farmers really need. But although it's complex and I think it's challenging, it's a process that we can all agree is worth investing in for the long-term sustainability of our entire industry. Really, as Bernie noted, it's more than just for farmers. It's the whole industry. So thank you everyone for participating in our panel.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you.